Hey, what's up guys? Tyler here with Secure Team. We want to talk about a very interesting topic. And it's basically about the fact, and this is actually a well-known story, but it's finally catching on again, being spread on various news sources. And it seems that people are finally taking a good hard look at this for what it was. It was an amazing subject having to do with remote viewing, and the fact that Stanford scientists observed a man basically traveling outside of his body and going into space who was able to accurately detail and describe a ring around Jupiter, which scientists at that time had no idea even existed, until the Voyager 1 spacecraft flew out there and took images of it in 1979. So for any of you guys out there who've never heard of the concept of remote viewing, basically, remote viewing is the practice of seeking impressions about a distant or unseen target using subjective means, in particular, extrasensory perception or sensing with the mind. Typically, a remote viewer is expected to give information about an object, event, or person, or location that is hidden from the physical view and separated by some distance. So basically, these remote viewers who worked with the government in the 70s, very well documented, would sit in a room and would be told to locate certain places. Now, this man particularly, who we are talking about, is a man named Ingo Swann. Now, if you haven't heard of this man and you haven't even read any of his books, get on Amazon and order them or download them to your Kindle, because Ingo Swann is the most recognized and respected remote viewer of all time. And he was the co-creator, along with Russell Targ and Harold Pluthoff, of remote viewing, and specifically the Stargate Project. Now, what was the Stargate Project, you ask? Well, Stargate Project was the code name for a U.S. Army unit established in 1978 at Fort Meade, Maryland, by the Defense Intelligence Agency and SRI International, to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic applications. This primarily involved remote viewing, which again is the purported ability to psychically see events, sights, and objects and gather information from places that are at a great distance from the remote viewer. So basically, this man, Ingo Swann, before NASA had even sent a spacecraft out to Jupiter, before they even knew there was a ring around Jupiter, he remote viewed, went out to Jupiter, and was able to describe this ring down to a T, which obviously shocked the overseers of the experiment and the government. So Ingo Swann was able to accurately view and describe this ring around Jupiter that scientists didn't know existed. And once this happened, Mr. Swann was given the task of remote viewing the moon, specifically the far side of the moon. And remember, this is after the NASA missions, when we know for a fact that the government had photographs of these alien bases and structures on the moon. And so they chose Swann due to the fact that even to other remote viewers around the world, they have the opinion that he is perhaps the best remote viewer in the world that has ever been. And so, in an article entitled "To the Moon and Back with Love" for the American Chronicle, writer Gary S. Buckham recounts Swann's remote viewing session about the moon, an event reported in Swann's own 1998 self-published work, Penetration. Now, quick note here. As I was talking to you earlier about what books of his to read, you definitely want to read Penetration. You can actually find a free PDF version of this book online in many places. But basically, Penetration, which you're seeing the cover of here, talks about his work as he was at one time a CIA psychic spy, where he describes his experiences within the ultra-secret government agency, and he goes into much detail about his remote viewing of the lunar surface, where mining and manufacturing operations were observed, along with human-looking extraterrestrials. And he goes on in this book to discuss these lunar anomalies that he saw on the moon. And later in the book, he deals with the government's military, science, and media cover-up of UFOs in general, lunar activity, and psychic phenomena, telepathy in particular, that has been covered up. Now, interesting thing to note is that over 20 publishers rejected his manuscript for his book at the time that he was trying to publish it, which in his opinion was due to government intervention. They did not want this information getting out because, again, it's already been proven that Mr. Swan successfully remote viewed things that NASA and scientists had never even known existed until a couple years later. So basically, the government and a man named Axelrod, just Axelrod, who was basically the code name for the man who was in charge of this super secret remote viewing experiment, and was basically Mr. Swan's handler at the time, asked Swan to target moon coordinates, about 10 different locations. But at the time, Mr. Swan did not know that these coordinates were on the moon. He was simply given the coordinates and was not told anything of the fact that these were 10 locations on the moon. And this remote viewing experience would bring him face to face with what he soon realized was an unearthly extraterrestrial experience and presence on the moon. So basically, Swan recounted the fact that when he was remote viewing the moon, he saw craters in darkness and realized that he was seeing the dark side of the moon, the side that always faces away from Earth. Now, upon achieving psychic contact with the lunar surface, Swan first came upon what looked like trails of, quote, tractor tread marks on the lunar surface. Now, does that sound familiar? Do you remember these pictures that I'm showing you here, that I've shown you numerous times in past videos, showing these marks traversing the moon, these trails, these tracks left by mining vehicles? If you remember in our last video, we were talking about how NASA blurs these objects out, and that they had blurred out a possible mining vehicle that you're seeing in this image here, where you can actually see part of the structure hanging out of the right side where the blur mark comes to an end. And we've proven without a doubt that these mining vehicles are up there. So he went on to say that he was seeing intelligent activity and structures on the moon. He said, and I quote, that in the depths of a crater he viewed a green, dusty haze lit by banks of artificial lights mounted on very large, tall towers. He was then stunned by the realization that, quote, someone or something had appeared to be building a base down on the moon, and that he realized that there was an extraterrestrial presence on the moon that was sensing him. As he remote viewed the lunar surface, it was almost as if he came in contact mentally with an extraterrestrial presence on the moon, and that they knew that he was remote viewing the moon. So basically, Swan figured out that he was being used by the government and by this mysterious Mr. Axelrod, basically for the task of physically spying on these alien moon bases, because apparently the extraterrestrials had been less than friendly about conventional human curiosity. And it definitely makes you wonder, and we've talked about this before, why have we never been back to the moon? After the Apollo missions ended in the 70s, we have never been back to the moon in all of these years, and don't have any plans in the foreseeable future to be going back. So were we warned off? We've already documented that the astronauts had seen craft and UFOs on the moon during their moon walks. So after Mr. Swan was tasked with remote viewing the moon, and he discovered some kind of life form or humanoid that had sensed his presence, suddenly the whole operation was terminated and everybody was sent home. And when Ingo asked if these guys are dangerous that he was remote viewing, his handler said that, well, there's no conclusive evidence. But it was also said in his book that the agency also recruited other people to remote view the moon before Ingo. And one of the only other best remote viewers, the most respectable, besides Mr. Ingo Swan, was a man named Pat Price. And unfortunately, Mr. Price died suddenly and rather painfully in 1975. And apparently Mr. Price was very interested in the UFO and alien phenomenon happening on the moon and in general, and some think that his death had a correlation to what Mr. Swan was tasked in doing. So again, it's all very interesting. And what Mr. Swan has said, and again, he states a lot of it in his book Penetration, has been correlated with the evidence that we've posted on this channel about alien activity happening on the moon. We have shown you the bases. We have shown you the towers. We have shown you objects flying on the moon in official NASA video, film footage, not just still images, flying down into craters, making extreme right-hand turns that only an anti-gravity craft could do. And we've shown you NASA's blatant airbrushing out and blurring of these structures on the moon. So, it's all very interesting. We will post some links down in the video description. There's actually a PDF that you can read online, published by the Stanford Institute about the remote viewing program. And yeah, we will let you read up on that. Definitely read the book and definitely dive into this thing that we call remote viewing, because there are people out there who have done it. They have seen things and they have corroborated quite successfully the evidence that we've spoken about on this channel, Ingo Swann being one of the most respected. And it's all very shocking because, again, he saw these things on the moon and he described things that were around a planet that scientists of Earth had no idea existed until they sent a spacecraft there to observe it. So let me know what you guys think. Check out the book. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe. And stick around because we've got a lot more coming, working on more videos right now. And we will post updates to when our next video will be up on Facebook and Twitter. So be sure to follow me there. And yeah, thanks for watching and stay safe.